The little girl asked just one simple question. "Dad, would you be sad if I didn't want to go to school tomorrow?" But that one question revealed a painful truth that had been hidden for too long, and her father did something no one else dared to do just to protect his child. "Tweet," came the first sound of morning birdsong, pure and lonely, as if it were trying to wake up the entire Cedar Hollow neighborhood from a dream still wrapped in mist. That day, the sky over Cedar Hollow was draped in a thin white veil, stretched across the quiet, red-tiled rooftops. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but a soft glow slipped through the kitchen window of Ethan Walker's home, casting light onto the old striped tablecloth, where a steaming cup of black coffee sat in silence. The crisp, early morning air seemed to soften everything, even the worry sitting heavy in Ethan's chest. He stood by the stove, stirring scrambled eggs with practiced rhythm, glancing up now and then at the apple-shaped clock on the wall. The hands pointed to 6:46 a.m. It was supposed to be a morning like any other, but something about it weighed on him. Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, hadn't come out of her room. On any other day, she'd have burst into the kitchen like a whirlwind, clutching her worn-out teddy bear, chattering away about her tangled dreams, often with no beginning or end. She'd swing her legs while talking, eyes shining like a little sun, waiting for her dad to set a plate of toast on the table. But today, the silence had swallowed everything. No hurried footsteps, no shrill voice asking if it was going to rain, something unnamed but unmistakably real. Ethan sat still, fingers tightening around the coffee mug, feeling like he was holding something more fragile than ceramic. It was a feeling, a father's intuition, that something had shifted, even if just slightly, but it was the kind of change no father ever wants to sense. A moment later, the bedroom door creaked open. Lily stepped out in a pale blue dress, clutching her frayed teddy bear with its worn left ear. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word. She quietly pulled out a chair and sat down, her eyes fixed on the floor. Ethan gently set the steaming plate of eggs on the aged wooden table and took a seat across from her. He didn't ask anything right away. He simply picked up a piece of egg and placed it carefully on her plate, then poured milk into the glass with the cat design she used to love. The space between them seemed suspended in air, broken only by the soft clink of the spoon against ceramic and the fragile rhythm of breath in a morning that felt unlike any other. "Did you sleep well?" Lily gave a small nod. "Not a word." Ethan forced a gentle smile. "Do you want to bring some cookies today? The kind you like, with the chocolate center?" "No thanks." Her voice was soft and thin as silk, nearly swept away by the breeze slipping through the door. He stayed still for a while, then he leaned forward and tied her shoelaces. Her small hand rested lightly on his shoulder, soft as a leaf. "Dad, if I'm not good, would you still love me?" His fingers froze mid-knot. He looked up. Her eyes weren't tearful, but they carried something deeper, older than a 7-year-old should ever know. Hesitation, worry, and something close to fear. "Lily, why would you ask that?" She didn't answer. She just clutched the hem of her dress tighter, still staring at the pale gray tiles beneath her feet. Ethan didn't push. He knew some things vanished like smoke if you rushed them, but deep inside, a cold ache crept in. After breakfast, Ethan quickly cleaned up and walked Lily out to the car. On the way to school, she sat in the backseat, hugging her backpack to her chest, eyes following the branches that whisked by outside the window. Ethan played a light jazz tune she used to enjoy because it reminded her of a game, but today, she didn't react. The music played, then faded, leaving a chilling silence that seemed to stretch forever. At the intersection, Ethan turned right, but instead of watching the traffic light, he glanced at the rearview mirror. Lily's reflection was faint, her expression distant, as if she wasn't really there. He tilted his head slightly toward the mirror and asked softly, "You have art class today, right? Got any ideas yet?" I don't know." Her voice was small, eyes still fixed on the window as if she were trying to disappear into a world of her own. He softened his tone, trying to bring back a memory. "How about drawing your teddy bear again? You used to say he ruled a secret kingdom, remember?" Lily pressed her lips together, then gently shook her head. "I don't want to draw anything." Ethan said nothing more. He gripped the steering wheel. "Sometimes, A quiet refusal is the loudest cry for help. At the school gate, he pulled over and got out to open the door for her. She didn't move right away, just sat there for a few seconds before slowly climbing out. As Ethan leaned down to adjust her backpack straps, she whispered, "If I disappeared, would you be sad?" He froze, looked up, but Lily had already run off, melting into the crowd of kids rushing toward the schoolyard. Not once did she look back. Ethan stood there, his hand still resting on the car door, heart skipping a beat. Behind him, the school bell rang, drowned by the noise of laughing children. But inside him, all sound faded into a heavy, silent darkness that no morning light could chase away. He returned to the car, sat behind the wheel for a long time. He didn't start the engine. His eyes stayed locked on the spot where Lily had disappeared. A thought rose slowly but firmly within him. He needed to listen, not just with his ears but with his heart. Behind him, the school gate had long since closed. After dropping Lily off at school, Ethan drove aimlessly through the old neighborhood before pulling into the small corner cafe he used to frequent. Dried lavender still hung in pots by the window, more out of habit than decoration. The noon sun slanted through the dusty glass panes, casting light across the aged terracotta tile floor. The scent of brewed coffee drifted in through the cracks, mingling with the soft hum of classic jazz playing from the speakers, like the steady breath of a quiet, weathered town. Ethan Walker sat alone at table 3, the small one across from the wall filled with faded photos of police officers who had visited the cafe over the past 40 years. In front of him was a half-filled parent-teacher conference form, the handwriting neat but slightly tilted, mirroring the uncertainty of the writer's mind. His black coffee had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. He wasn't even looking out the window. His mind replayed that morning, how Lily said nothing as she stepped out of the car in front of school. It wasn't until her small backpack slipped off her shoulder that Ethan noticed her hands trembling. "I'll pick you up early today, okay?" Ethan had said with a forced smile. Lily just nodded softly and turned away. Now, before heading to the school office, Ethan had stopped for a pause. The cafe's owner, Mr. Whitaker, a retired cop, still carried the air of command and a sharp gaze that suggested he'd never truly left the job. Thomas Whitaker brought out the coffee, placed it in front of Ethan, and sat down across from him without asking. He stared at him for a long moment before asking, "What's going on with the girl? She doesn't seem like the other kids." Ethan looked down at the table and answered quietly, "She's scared of something, but she won't say what it is." Whitaker nodded slowly, eyes narrowing as if connecting invisible dots. "Does she look out the window a lot, go completely silent when adults talk? Has she ever said things like, 'Would you still love me if I wasn't good?'" Ethan froze. He looked up, shock and a trace of suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Everything you just said. That's exactly what I've been sensing, but couldn't explain." "How do you know?" Whitaker's voice dropped. "Because I've seen kids like that in some of the worst cases I ever worked. They don't cry, they don't complain, but their eyes learn how to stay silent just to survive." Ethan stayed quiet for a long time. Then he stood, left money for the coffee, and thanked him. Whitaker said just one thing before Ethan walked out the door. "Don't let that little girl fight this battle alone." Near noon, Ethan crossed the courtyard of Clearbrook Elementary, where hanging planters had started to wither from neglect. The air carried the dry, sterile scent of paper and chalk. The parent office sat beside the row of classrooms, with a frosted glass door labeled in peeling letters, "Parents, please knock before entering." He knocked 3 times. A woman's voice replied from inside, "Come in." Ethan stepped inside and for the first time met his daughter's new teacher. Ms. Catherine Doyle sat behind a laminated wood desk, her hair in a tight bun, her face as rigid as stone. She wore thin framed glasses, her gaze sharp and cold. "I'm Lily Walker's father," Ethan said calmly. "I came to fill out the parent-teacher form and to check on how my daughter's doing in class." Mrs. Doyle studied him for a moment, then nodded and gestured toward the chair opposite her. "Your daughter is quite sensitive," she said slowly, choosing each word with care. "She cries easily. She's overly emotional. In a classroom setting, that's not an advantage." Ethan sat up straighter. I believe school should be a place where children feel safe, not forced to be strong." Ms. Doyle gave a slight smirk but didn't smile. "Society can be harsh on sensitive children. If they don't learn to protect themselves, they'll get pushed aside." Ethan held her gaze, seeing behind those glasses a woman who didn't believe in compassion. "And how do you teach them to be strong?" She crossed her arms. "Through discipline, routine, and silence when necessary." Ethan stood, his tone still calm, though his hands were clenched. "If my daughter has caused you any trouble, I'd like to speak about it directly, but I won't let anyone turn her sensitivity into a flaw." Ms. Doyle said nothing. Her eyes lingered on Ethan's face for a beat, as if calculating something. Then she looked down and signed the form without another word. That night, Ethan sat motionless by the window. The desk lamp cast a soft, dim glow over his narrow shoulders, falling across the dark wood like a smear of fading light. The house was so still, the tick of the wall clock sounded like a blade slicing through the silence. Lily's bedroom door was ajar, the faint yellow light spilling a narrow path into the hallway. Ethan looked that way but didn't move. A shapeless, unnamed fear held him back, as if opening that door might shatter something fragile beyond repair. Then a sound emerged, soft and strangled, like a cry held in too long, finally crossing the line of silence. It wasn't loud, not violent, but it shook every nerve in Ethan's body. He rushed to the room and opened the door. Lily clutched her stuffed bear, her eyes shut tight, whispering in her sleep, "I don't want to be away from you. Don't let them take you." Ethan sat on the bed and pulled her into his arms. Her pajamas were damp with cold sweat. He didn't say a word, only held her tighter. Outside, the wind rustled through the dry tree branches, a whispering sound that lingered like a memory too old to name, murmuring the truths most adults never dared face. The next morning, Ethan drove to Oak Ridge Park, not to look for anything in particular, but to find a piece of himself in the rare calm that the city sometimes offered. He sat down on the same old stone bench that had witnessed countless moments of silent reflection. In his hands was a cup of black coffee, still warm, its rich aroma blending into the early morning air, carried by the breeze, sharpening his focus just slightly. He didn't drink it, he simply held it, as if it were the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. From the pocket of his coat, he took out an old photo that Margaret Ellis had given him the day before. Catherine Doyle stood in the center of a row of teachers, her face cold, her gaze sharp as a blade. It made Ethan feel as though he were being watched. He hadn't slept properly the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, that look returned, alongside the image of Lily trembling in the corner like a frightened little bird. The helplessness gripped his chest, tightening with every breath. But today, instead of letting fear overtake him, Ethan felt something different, as if he were slowly gathering the scattered pieces of a larger puzzle, and the full picture was beginning to emerge. He knew that if he kept silent, he would only be contributing to the cycle his daughter might never escape. He set the photo beside the coffee, his eyes following the way the autumn leaves twirled gently through the air. The darkness had shown itself, and he knew it was time to be the one to bring the light. The coffee had long since gone cold, but he still hadn't taken a sip. He kept turning the paper cup in his hand, as though the answer to everything might be hiding in those brown swirls at the bottom. Sitting across from him was Logan Pierce, his best friend since college, the only person Ethan could be open with, even if only through silence. They had been through years together, from lecture halls to the bruises of adult life. Now, one of them was a county courthouse security guard, the other a single father clinging to an ever-growing storm of doubt. "She's not the Lily I used to know anymore," Ethan said, his voice rough, eyes still fixed on the empty space beyond Logan's shoulder. The words didn't seek agreement. They were just a pain that needed release. Logan didn't reply immediately. He leaned back on the bench, eyes scanning the branches above them, now beginning to shift into shades of gold and rust. "What exactly do you mean?" Ethan pulled out a cigarette, paused, then slid it back into the pack. He bowed his head and rubbed his forehead. "She's afraid of water, Refuses to take a bath. Every night before bed, she checks the window 3 times, and if I reach up for anything, even just a glass, she flinches like she's about to be hit. Logan went still for a moment. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and gave a quiet squeeze. "Did you ask her directly?" Ethan nodded. "She just said, 'If I tell, they'll take you away.'" Then she cried. The silence between them thickened. A couple jogged past, their steady footsteps and short breaths the only sounds. A breeze blew in from the nearby lake, carrying the smell of damp grass and cool mist. But in Ethan's chest, a storm was raging. Logan exhaled deeply, then spoke with care. "I've heard things about Ms. Doyle. Back when I worked in the legal archives, I heard she was reassigned, but no one ever said why." Ethan looked up, a spark returning to his eyes. "Reassigned from where?" Logan nodded, eyes distant as he sifted through old memories. "Westfield High. There's a woman who's worked at the library there forever. Her name's Margaret Ellis. If anyone knows what happened with Doyle, it's probably her." Ethan was silent for a beat, his eyes fixed on his friend's face. Then he stood up, voice soft but certain. "Thanks, Logan. I'm going this afternoon. No matter what, I need to know the truth." Westfield High sat hidden behind rows of aging trees, its iron gate slightly ajar. The wooden door to the library creaked as Ethan pushed it open. Inside, warm amber light streamed through tall windows, catching the dust that floated gently in the air. Ethan walked slowly between the shelves, and suddenly, the scent of old paper, damp wood, and time brought him back. At the far end of the room, a woman was sorting books. Her hair was neatly tied back, though several silver strands shimmered softly under the light like threads of glass. He approached and said, "Hello, I'm Ethan Walker. If you don't mind, I need to ask you something important." She paused, lifted her gaze to meet his, equal parts cautious and weary. "I'm Margaret. What do you need?" Ethan didn't hold back. "I need to know about Catherine Doyle. My daughter is in her class. She's changed, and I need to know why." Margaret looked at him for a long moment, then sighed and removed her reading glasses. "I'm not surprised. I always thought this would come out eventually." Ethan held his breath. "She used to teach here, didn't she?" he asked. Margaret nodded, her voice even and soft. "Yes. She taught English literature. At first, she was very strict, very formal. But over time, students started getting quiet around her. Then, afraid. I remember once she grabbed a boy by the arm and dragged him out of class right in the middle of a lesson. He didn't fight back. He just cried the entire afternoon. Then he stopped coming to school. No one said anything. It was like it had never happened. The administration turned a blind eye. Parents stayed silent. Ethan frowned. Why didn't anyone speak up? Her husband worked for the city board of education. No one wanted trouble. Ethan lowered his head, hands clasped beneath the table. Margaret stood, walked to a cabinet behind her, and pulled out an old group photo. The colors had faded, but Catherine's face stood out, her eyes sharp as razors, her lips tight, her presence chilling. There are people who wear the title of teacher but never teach from the heart. I can't do more, but please, protect your daughter. Ethan took the photo, eyes lingering on her face. His voice was low, lined with gratitude and something sadder. Thank you. That's enough for me to know what I have to do. When Ethan left the library, the sun had already begun to dip. Golden light streamed through the dusty windows, forming slanted beams that seemed to reach back into memory. Down the hall, a group of students laughed and ran across the courtyard, their footsteps echoing joyfully. Ethan stood still in the middle of it, heart aching at the thought that Lily had once belonged to that world, before retreating into a shell of fear he still couldn't break through. He gripped the photo, then tucked it into his coat pocket. His steps were slow but certain. Even if the road ahead led to locked gates, he would find a way through. For Lily, for the smile that had vanished from his daughter's face long ago. Darkness was falling by the time Ethan got home. The small house nestled in a quiet corner of Cedar Hollow, the glow from the street lamp casting long, tense shadows across the kitchen table. He opened the old wooden cabinet in the storage room. Inside were tools from his days as a sound technician at the town's little theater. A lapel mic, a headset, a few reels of tape. And then he saw it. A small, silver recording device. old but still intact. Ethan held it in his hand. It felt heavy, like a vow unspoken. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the device beside it. His lips pressed together and he whispered, barely loud enough for even himself to hear, "If you can't say it, then let me hear it for you." Ethan knew that from this moment on, there would be no turning back. The first rays of sunlight crept through the window, landing on the old wooden table in his kitchen. He was carefully wiping off every speck of dust from a small blue hair clip, Lily's favorite accessory. His hand brushed gently against the worn plastic edges, not because it was old, but because it had been used so often, part of their rushed morning routines, part of the sparkle in his daughter's eyes every time she saw herself in the mirror and smiled. But today, that clip held something different. Ethan had spent the entire previous night embedding a tiny recording device inside it, disguised so well that no one could notice. Not because he was paranoid, but because he had no other choice. Lily hadn't said a word, only looked at him with eyes full of hesitation and silent despair. He wasn't good at confrontation, but as a father, doing nothing was not an option. Lily walked out of her room, holding her worn-out stuffed bear. Her eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep. Ethan sat down beside the sofa and called her over. "Can I do your hair today?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The girl turned around, letting her shoulder-length hair fall gently down her back. "You're putting the clip on today?" she asked quietly, her legs swinging softly, toes brushing the tiled floor. Ethan answered with a smile, even though something in his chest felt tight, because today, you're going to be the strongest princess of all. Lily gave a soft smile, the first in days, then stood up and grabbed her backpack. Her footsteps toward the door seemed lighter, but Ethan knew it wasn't because she felt safe. It was because she was used to the fear. His small office was on the mezzanine, next to a window that looked out over the bougainvillea vines. One corner of the wall had been converted into a workspace. An old computer, monitoring headphones, and a clutter of yellow sticky notes with scribbled reminders like, "Mark the start and end time," "Stay calm," and "Listen carefully, don't assume." He picked up his phone and dialed Logan Pierce, the only friend he could trust with something like this. "Hello? Ethan?" "You're calling early," Logan answered, his voice scratchy with surprise. Ethan spoke slowly. "I did it, Logan. The device is in the hair clip. Today's the first day." There was silence on the other end. "Are you sure about this? If it's real, what are you going to do next?" Ethan glanced at the old photo on the wall, the one of him and Lily taken last year at the park. "I don't know. But I can't just keep watching her shut down every day. I have the number for Noah Whitman," Logan continued. "He investigated that teacher abuse case in Santa Lucia. He's kind of reckless, but he's reliable. If anything happens, call him." Ethan nodded, saying nothing more. He just wanted the truth to come out, no matter how painful it might be. Clearbrook Elementary sat tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its green-painted gate peeling from age. Lily walked through the entrance in her slightly oversized uniform, her backpack swaying with each step. She sat in the third row from the back, near the window, the least noticeable spot, where she could watch the sycamore tree outside, the only thing that brought her peace during class. The bell rang. Then came the sharp rhythm of high heels echoing across the cold, tiled floor. Miss Catherine Doyle entered the room, her eyes as cold as steel. She scanned the room and stopped when she saw Lily. "Lily." Her voice didn't need to be loud. It was enough to silence the entire class. "Stand up. It's your turn today." Lily rose slowly. Her chair scraped softly against the floor, making her flinch. She held her book with both hands, but her fingers trembled so badly that the pages slipped out of order. Miss Doyle walked over, snatched the book from her, flipped it to the correct page, and slammed it onto the desk. "If you don't know the answer, say so. Don't pretend to be innocent." No one dared to look up. Every pair of eyes stayed fixed on the desks. Lily swallowed hard, fighting back the tears. On her head, the little blue clip recorded it all in silence. That afternoon, Ethan picked Lily up. He didn't ask anything, he just held out his hand and she reached for it instinctively. On the way home, she stared out the window, as quiet as always. Once home, Ethan told her to take a shower and watch some cartoons. While she was distracted, he carefully removed the clip. He locked himself in his office, closed the blinds, and turned on the desk lamp. He plugged the device into his computer. An audio file appeared. 5 hours, 42 minutes. Ethan folded his arms, took a deep breath, and put on the headphones. At first, he heard whispers of children, the rustle of papers, pencils tapping on notebooks. Then, suddenly, silence, and Miss Doyle's voice cut through, clear and cold. "Lily, stand up. It's your turn today." Ethan closed his eyes. His chest tightened, as if it were being crushed, and inside that small room there was only the sound of a father quietly bracing himself for the storm that had begun to take shape, one sound at a time, one threat at a time, all of it real. The light in the study was still on, casting a weary yellow glow onto the worn tile floor where Ethan sat motionless in front of the computer. Every clack of the keyboard echoed in his chest like shattered musical notes. He had thought he was ready. He truly believed he was. But when the truth arrived, it never resembled the version you imagine. The blue hair clip lay still on the table, an inanimate witness, and also the bridge that had led him to the edge of heartbreak. The sound through the headphones was cold, raw, no introduction, no music. At first, there was only a soft layer of noise, the clatter of pens, whispers from children, chairs scraping across the floor. A classroom that, on the surface, sounded ordinary. But then, as if someone had shut off the light inside him, a sound pierced the air that made his heart jolt. Smack. No one needed to tell him what that was. Ethan knew. It was a slap. He didn't react right away. He just sat upright, gripping the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Then came a woman's voice, hoarse, soaked in venomous rage. "You're the most useless kid in the whole class. What's crying going to fix?" Ethan clenched the headphones tighter, as if doing so might keep her voice from seeping deeper into his soul, but it was no use. "No one loves you. You're a burden. Even your father's just pretending. Don't think your tears mean a damn thing to me." He shut his eyes. But ears don't shut, and hearts don't pretend they aren't breaking. Lily said nothing, but in that audio clip, Ethan could hear her rapid breathing, then a small, barely audible sob, so faint anyone else might have missed it, but not Ethan. He pictured his daughter sitting there, her eyes drained of light, her fingers clenched around the edge of her skirt, head bowed to hide a tear that wasn't allowed to fall. "Lily," Miss Catherine Doyle's voice softened, but it lost none of its cruelty. "If you tell anyone, I'll tell them your father's a criminal. They'll take you away. You'll never see him again." Ethan trembled. It felt as if he were reliving a buried memory, not from his daughter, but from some distant corner of his own past. He leaned toward the computer, wanting to stop the playback, but his hand couldn't lift. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The emotion inside him was beyond tears. It was a deep internal quake, a disorienting storm of anger, helplessness, and fear. Bottled into silence so thick it screamed. Catherine's voice stabbed through again, like a knife twisted in the listener's chest. "No one loves you. You're a burden. Even your father only pretends to care because he pities you." Ethan fell back into his chair. His eyes remained wide open, staring at the ceiling as if searching for something to anchor him, but everything in the room felt tilted, pulled down by the weight of that voice. His heart raced, but his limbs were frozen. He replayed that final line of the recording 3 times. Each time, it struck like a hammer blow to a soul already frayed. "Tell me, who would ever want someone like you? No one. And deep down, you already know that." That's when the front door gave a soft knock. Ethan didn't turn. The door creaked open, and Logan's voice called from behind him. "Ethan?" No reply. Logan stepped in quietly. He found his friend sitting like stone, eyes red but dry. On the computer screen, the audio timeline was frozen at 32 minutes, 49 seconds. Ethan reached slowly for the mouse and hit play again. He didn't say a word. He wanted Logan to hear it for himself, without interpretation, and so they sat there together, in the small room, beneath the pale yellow light, listening once more to that same voice. When the clip ended, Ethan rose to his feet. He walked slowly to the window and pushed it open for air. Outside, the wind still stirred. Streetlights reflected coldly off the barbed wire fence across the road, glinting like threads of glass. "We can't let this get buried," Logan said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Ethan, this needs to be exposed, but you can't do this alone." Ethan turned back, his eyes clearer now, like a fog had finally lifted. "I've been silent long enough. No other child should ever hear words like those again." Logan nodded and stepped closer, gently placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. They stood that way for a long while, without needing to say anything more. Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled to a familiar name. His fingers trembled as he dialed. One ring, then two. On the third, Noah Whitman's voice came through, calm and steady as always. "Hello, this is Noah." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I have proof of child abuse by Miss Catherine Doyle. I need you to bring the truth to light." Noah's tone didn't change. "Send me everything you've got. We're going to make sure she doesn't get to walk away from this." Ethan ended the call. He stared at the little blue hair clip on the desk. It lay quietly, like a punctuation mark between two chapters of life, one of silence and one of a door beginning to open. He turned to Logan and said, "Tomorrow, we make sure no one else suffers in the dark." After the horrifying night before, the soft yellow glow of the street lamps stretched across the damp sidewalk, reflecting hazy streaks of light like memories spilled from a long-forgotten afternoon. Ethan Walker and Logan Pierce walked slowly down the old stone-paved sidewalk, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet of the night. Neither said a word. Everything had already been said that afternoon, when the sound of Lily's sobs still lingered in Ethan's mind, like a mournful song with no end. In his hand was the phone, still holding the recording he'd listened to so many times he had memorized every breath. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" Logan finally asked, his voice low and cautious. "Maybe we should wait until we have a lawyer, or at least bring Noah, just in case." Ethan stopped at the old stone steps leading up to Principal Glenn Foster's house. He turned to look at his friend, his eyes showing a mix of determination and weariness. "I can't wait another day, Logan." Every morning she still puts on that backpack, still walks into that school and sees that face, and she's still there, acting like nothing ever happened. Do you have any idea what that helplessness feels like? Logan nodded slowly, then followed Ethan up the steps. Ethan rang the bell. The doorbell echoed sharply, cold and metallic. They stood there in silence, Ethan's breath heavy and uneven, like someone still drenched from an emotional storm he couldn't shake off. The door creaked open. Glenn Foster stood there in a thick gray sweater, hair disheveled and eyes heavy with irritation. He squinted as if unsure whether the figures at his door were real or just fragments from a restless night. "What the hell are you two doing here? Do you know what time it is?" Glenn barked, his voice sharp with annoyance. Ethan didn't answer. He simply raised his phone and hit play. In the thick, weighty silence of the night, the recording spilled out loud and clear. Catherine Doyle screaming, the sharp, brutal sound of slaps, Lily's choked sobs, and then that chilling line, cold enough to freeze blood. "If you say anything, I'll make them believe your daddy's a criminal." Glenn's face changed instantly. The irritation vanished, replaced by a flash of shock, quickly overtaken by guarded calculation. He folded his arms, stepping back as if instinctively creating a defensive gap, then spoke with forced composure. "I understand you're upset, but I suggest you stop right here." Ethan's brow tightened, his voice hoarse with anger. "You knew everything, and you chose to stay silent?" Glenn didn't respond. He simply shrugged, stepping further inside, his hand resting on the door as if preparing to shut it. His tone turned deliberate, calculated. "Don't let your emotions burn everything down, Ethan. There are people who can erase the truth if they want to. Catherine isn't alone. If you take that recording public, you'll lose Lily. Child Protective Services will get involved, and they won't side with a single father, no matter how right you think you are." The air felt heavy, as if it had solidified around them. Ethan's fists clenched, his knuckles whitening, the veins in his wrists pulsed hard, each word from Glenn slicing deeper into a heart already worn thin from too much silence. "I don't give a damn about your rotten system," Ethan growled, his voice cracked but each word sharp as steel. "The only thing I care about is my daughter, and this time I'm not backing down." Glenn stared at him with an icy smirk, a mocking glint in his eyes. "This system? It was built to protect the powerful, not those who try to expose the truth. In that instant, Ethan heard nothing but his own heartbeat pounding in his chest. He stepped forward, eyes darkening, and without hesitation, his fist flew. The punch wasn't just anger, it was judgment. A verdict delivered on years of complicit silence, landing square on Glenn Foster's face like the blow of justice itself. The sharp sound of the impact echoed into the night. Principal Foster staggered back, his hand clutching his cheek, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. He looked at Ethan with disbelief, then muttered under his breath, half a threat, half a warning to himself. "You just signed your own death warrant." Logan immediately pulled Ethan back. The two turned around and quickly walked out of the small courtyard, leaving behind a slamming door filled with fury. The wind rustled through the trees, sending leaves fluttering down like fragments of memories Ethan had long tried to bury. A while later, as the streetlight filtered through the branches, casting flickering patterns on the brick sidewalk, Ethan finally spoke in a low voice. "They didn't just hurt Lily. They've forced countless other children to live in silence and fear, just because no one dared to speak the truth." Logan nodded, his eyes fixed ahead. He didn't need to say anything. That silence alone was enough to affirm one thing: there was no turning back now. Inside Ethan's chest, something had broken. Not fear, but the boundary between hesitation and resolve. A silent vow had been made, one that didn't need a name, but would guide him from this moment forward like a flame in the dark. Instead, a low cloud blanketed the sky, and soft light fell across moss-covered, red-tile rooftops like time-worn scars. But beyond the old wooden door was a different world, one where the clatter of typewriters once echoed, where every line of news had been crafted with courage and conscience. On the third floor was the private workspace of Noah Whitman, a man who had never bowed to power and never backed down when truth was twisted. He had once forced a school principal to resign, brought a mayor to trial, and in return had received 3 anonymous death threats. Each time he had simply smirked, placed his fingers on the keyboard, and kept writing. His office was cluttered but alive. Scattered across the desk were school district maps, faded newspaper clippings, photojournal prints, and coffee cups gone cold. On the wall hung a black and white photograph capturing a moment of protest in the town square. In the crowd, a small boy stood holding a sign that read, "Silence is also a crime." In that room, every breath carried the weight of moral tension. And that morning, within those walls, a meeting would pass on the first spark of revolution. Ethan Walker and Logan Pierce arrived early. So early, in fact, that the newsroom lights hadn't all been turned on. Noah stood by the window, gazing out over the square below, his expression somber. When the knock came at the door, he didn't turn. He simply said softly, "Come in." Ethan placed the phone on the desk without a word. Logan pulled out chairs for them both. Noah sat across from them, switched on the recorder in the middle of the table, and didn't ask a single question. He didn't interrupt. When the audio began playing, the air in the room changed instantly. Miss Catherine Doyle's voice burst through, sharp, furious, and impossible to deny. There were slaps, sobs, and then the sentence that cut like a knife. "If you say anything, I'll make them believe your dad is a criminal." When the recording ended, silence didn't settle like it usually did. It landed like a shockwave. Noah reached out to stop the recording, eyes fixed on the table for a few moments. Then he looked up, his voice low and steady. "Are you ready to lose your reputation, your job, even face threats, just to save your daughter?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "She lost her smile? I'll get it back, even if it costs me everything." Noah nodded slowly. Then he stood and poured fresh coffee for all 3 of them, saying nothing. That was how he processed things, through actions, not words. When he sat back down, his voice was firmer. "I won't write a single word if this is just a personal matter, but if you truly want to see this through to the end, I'm with you." Logan spoke, still cautious. "What do you want us to do? And what will you give in return?" "I need truth," Noah replied, "and real stories to shine a light on those old files. I have a pile of letters, buried complaints, and shady internal reports, but they're just paper without faces, names, and voices. Today I finally have that." Noah opened his laptop. His contact list was long. He dialed several numbers, but only one picked up. "This is Rachel Jennings," said a woman on the other end, her voice calm but tinged with caution. Noah asked gently but firmly, "You once said your daughter came home with a red handprint on her cheek. Is that true?" There was a pause, then a long, weary sigh. "I still have the photo, but when I tried to file a complaint, the teacher called me into her office and said that if I made a fuss, my daughter could be moved to another class or even labeled as a problem student. I was scared, so I stayed quiet." Noah paused, then turned on speakerphone. His voice was steady, not loud, but serious enough to hold weight. "Rachel, today, are you ready to tell the truth?" A sharp breath, then hesitation. "I don't know. I'm a single mom, but if someone else stands up first, then maybe. Maybe I don't want my child growing up believing silence is the way to survive." Ethan clenched his fists for the first time that morning. Noah turned to him and nodded. Monday. The first article goes on the front page. And from there, the momentum won't just move the news, it'll stir something inside all the people who once stayed silent. That afternoon, Noah left the newsroom early to meet an old friend in education. Meanwhile, Ethan and Logan visited Rachel Jennings at her apartment. Her home was modest but tidy. She pulled out her phone and showed them the photo. Her daughter's face was smudged, her left cheek still marked with a red imprint. "Lily once asked my daughter if she was scared. My little girl said no, because at home, her mom protects her. But I was the one who stayed silent. I haven't forgiven myself." Ethan gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You will make it right, not through words, but by standing up for your daughter and for all the other kids." That night, back at the newsroom, Noah sat alone at his desk, the yellow glow of a desk lamp falling across notes and folders. A black and white photo lay before him showing Lily's classroom. The children's faces were a mix of joy and unease. Some of their eyes seemed to look straight at the reader, demanding to be heard. Beneath the photo, Noah typed the headline, one word at a time, like carving into stone. "When a classroom is no longer safe, who will hear what children cannot say?" The story didn't start with data. It began with a tale. A little girl lost her smile. She didn't say much, but everyone could hear her silent cry for help, and there was a father who chose not to stay silent. After sending the draft to the editorial board, Noah stood at the window once more. Outside, the square glowed with city lights, traffic flowing endlessly, silhouettes passing one another as if nothing had happened. But inside him, something had shifted. He knew truth didn't always roar like fire. Often, it began as a flicker, a faint glimmer in the hand of someone brave enough to carry it. This time, the spark didn't start with him, but he would be the one to guard it, to keep it burning through the night until it reached the places that needed it most. Across town, Ethan sat in his daughter's room. Lily was finally asleep, her face at peace, for the first time in weeks. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'll bring justice. I'll bring truth, so you can grow up in a fairer world. I promise you, and I promise myself." Outside, wind rustled the old trees, carrying the scent of morning coffee and an unspoken vow, still unnamed but already deep in his heart. Inside their small apartment, the glow of the nightlight remained steady, like the very first flame of a change greater than anyone could imagine. Monday morning began with a chilly breeze brushing over the damp cobblestone streets of Cedar Hollow. On the front page of the Hollow Times, a large headline stretched across the upper half. "The silence in the classroom. The hellish recording reveals the truth." Beneath it was a blurred black and white photo, anonymized for privacy. It showed a little girl curled up at the back of the classroom, her hands clutching the straps of her backpack, an image that haunted readers without ever revealing her face. Just from the posture, the sense of unease radiated unmistakably. At a small corner street in the usually quiet Bluebird Cafe, once only busy on weekends, the place was now unusually crowded. The old wooden tables were pushed close together, extra chairs borrowed from the nearby diner. The room was packed. Parents, retired teachers, townspeople, and even strangers from other neighborhoods. Ethan Walker sat at a corner table, holding a cup of cold coffee. In front of him lay a wrinkled printout of that morning's article. The headline creased from how tightly he'd been gripping it. Beside him sat Noah Whitman, his face visibly tense. Before arriving, they had received dozens of messages, voice notes, videos, personal testimonies. fragments that together painted a grim picture of the school where Lily was studying. "Do you really think they're ready to speak up?" Noah asked, his voice low and deliberate as his eyes scanned the room, full of people restraining something inside. He paused, then added more quietly, "Some fears have been rooted for so long. Not everyone has the strength to dig them out in front of others." Ethan nodded, his voice steady and slow. "We can't force them, but if they came here, it means they're waiting for someone to go first." The first to stand was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the weary look of someone who had seen too much. He introduced himself softly. "My name is Thomas Whitaker. I work at the Department of Education. I can't go public, but I have a video. Ms. Doyle once struck a student with learning difficulties in her class. I recorded it, but I deleted the beginning out of fear. But now, I can't stay silent anymore." The entire room went silent. Ethan nodded at him, saying nothing, but his eyes showed deep gratitude. A young woman rose, eyes red. She held out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling to an audio file. "My son was once locked inside the science lab for 3 hours just because he failed a reading test. Ms. Doyle said it was educational discipline. I begged them, but the principal said my son needed to learn accountability." Another parent, voice shaking with anger, added, "My daughter came home with bruises on her arm, said she was forced to rewrite her assignment until it was perfect. I asked the school and they said she fell down the stairs." One story after another, each testimony peeled open an old wound. Each voice uncovered a piece of the truth long buried in silence. Noah reached into his bag and pulled out a printed transcript of a recording sent anonymously by a parent. In it, Principal Glenn Foster's voice rang out during an internal meeting. "As long as the students' results look good, we can shape them a little. No one can check everything. What matters is the final report." Ethan listened, his hand gripping the edge of the table. His face didn't change, but his eyes were red. He looked around the room, nervous, tense faces, but also hopeful ones. Finally, he stood. No microphone needed, just a voice clear and firm. "We're not here for revenge. We're here for our children, and for every child who deserves to grow up without fear. Each one of us has a story, and when those stories come together, they're no longer random. They're evidence." He paused briefly, then continued. "Tomorrow may be difficult. There may be threats, distortions. But if we stay silent, people like Miss Doyle and Principal Foster will continue, and there will be another Lily." From the back of the room, a young man finally spoke up. "What can we do?" Noah answered. "Send in every piece of evidence, even if it feels small. Record your children's words, what your coworkers say, what your neighbors mention. If you can't reveal your name, use an anonymous account. We'll handle the legal side. But the most important thing is this: don't stay silent anymore." After the meeting, many lingered. They shook Ethan's hand, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, or simply nodded. Small gestures, but full of support. Empathy was spreading like quiet embers in the middle of winter. That same afternoon, the article was shared over 20,000 times across social media platforms. A group of parents created a community forum, Voices of Cedar Hollow, to gather stories. A local TV station began investigating, and in a government office in Mexico City, a legislative aide quietly printed out the article. That night, in Ethan's small home office, a warm desk lamp lit up his face as he read through messages from parents across the country. Noah sat beside him, a newly opened file in hand. "This isn't just an isolated incident anymore," Noah said quietly, eyes fixed on the page. "This is the collapse of a cover-up system." Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked out the window where night mist began to gather over the street. The yellow streetlights blurred behind foggy glass like layered memories. Finally, he whispered, "I'm just a father trying to do the right thing." Outside, the church bell rang slowly. No one knew what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, at least, they had spoken up. And from that moment on, silence no longer ruled Cedar Hollow. That morning, Cedar Hollow did not wake up to the sound of alarm clocks or bird song. It woke to a thick, choking silence, the wail of police sirens echoing through narrow alleys and the flickering red and blue lights flashing against the weathered rooftops. An ordinary day was halted by something utterly extraordinary. At Dorothy Myers's bakery on the corner of Main Street, an old television was already on. The morning news was broadcasting live from the gates of Clearbrook Elementary School. Patrol cars lined up bumper to bumper, reporters pushing forward with microphones raised, and behind the barricades, a crowd of bewildered parents. The headline scrolling across the screen read, "School Abuse Scandal Rocks Cedar Hollow, Principal and Teacher Under Investigation." The quiet of the neighborhood now felt strangled. Newspaper vendors called louder than usual. Students walked with heavier steps. Parents whispered more often and more anxiously than they had the day before. Inside the school, the usual bustle of the hallway had faded to the squeak of shoes and muffled murmurs behind sleeves. The teacher's lounge was frozen. The ticking of the old wall clock echoed like a countdown to detonation. Teachers no longer met each other's eyes. Heads stayed down, eyes locked on the printed summons tacked to the bulletin board. The auditorium had been prepared hastily. Chairs were lined up in rows, ceiling lights glaring down on tense faces. On stage sat representatives from the State Board of Education, the Sheriff of Cedar Hollow, a district attorney, and two central figures, Principal Glenn Foster and Ms. Catherine Doyle. Catherine wore her signature burgundy blazer, perfectly styled, her expression still cold enough to send chills down the spine. Beside her, Principal Foster occasionally glanced at the front row, where parent representatives sat shoulder to shoulder like a human shield. Ethan Walker had arrived early. He sat in the last row between Logan Pierce and Noah Whitman. The three men, silent as pillars, carried within them the weight of both dread and readiness. Ethan's hands were clenched, his eyes fixed on the stage. The meeting began. A woman from the board stood and read a formal statement, her voice steady but strained. "We regret the events that have taken place at Clearbrook Elementary School. The allegations of child abuse are deeply troubling and unacceptable. We are committed to a full, open, and transparent investigation." Her words slashed through the room like a blade. Murmurs spread through the audience. A few teachers bowed their heads. Others turned toward Catherine. She did not flinch. Ethan stood up. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait to be called. His voice rang out, calm but powerful. "I'm not a lone father anymore. You used to protect a system, but that system didn't protect our children. It protected power. Principal Foster, you were supposed to defend your students. Instead, you chose power over compassion." The murmurs became an uproar. A few parents clapped. Foster gave a dry laugh and leaned into the mic. "I understand your anger, Mr. Walker, but personal emotions cannot guide a school's operations. I did what was necessary to keep things from falling apart. If we let emotions rule, we lose order and the trust of our community." From the back of the auditorium, a voice rose. At first, no one noticed, but then a small hand lifted and a fifth-grade boy stood up. His voice trembled, but was clear. "Ms. Doyle slapped me once, just because I was writing too slow. I didn't tell my mom. I thought it was my fault. I thought I deserved it." A silence engulfed the room. A parent broke into tears. Another rushed outside to make a call. All eyes turned toward Catherine Doyle. Her face had gone pale. The hands that once gripped the microphone hung limp at her sides. A police officer stepped forward. He read the subpoena in a firm, solemn tone. "Miss Catherine Doyle, under Section 112 of the Penal Code of the State of Arizona, you are hereby summoned for investigation regarding child abuse and abuse of authority." Catherine didn't resist. She simply stepped back, as if something had collapsed inside her. The officer handcuffed her beneath the glare of camera flashes. The sound of shutters clicking filled the air, like the final nail sealing a door long overdue to close. Glenn Foster lowered his head. He said nothing, but his hands clutched the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. The board representative then announced his suspension pending the results of the investigation. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Reporters flooded the exits. Journalists chased every major figure out of the auditorium. Many teachers slipped away through side doors to avoid scrutiny. Parents hugged their children. Some wept. Some sank down onto the pavement outside. Ethan didn't care about the cameras pointed his way. He scanned the schoolyard, searching for the small figure of Lily in the restless crowd. She stood beneath a tree at the far end of the yard, her long hair half covering her face. When Ethan approached, she looked up. There was no fear in Lily's eyes anymore, no urge to hide, no desire to disappear. He dropped to his knees, arms open. Lily ran into him, clung to him tightly, and whispered, her voice soft but steady, "I'm not afraid anymore, Daddy." Ethan said nothing. He just held her closer, as if trying to hold on to that moment forever. Across the yard, Logan and Noah stood quietly, eyes red, no words necessary. They had stood with Ethan from the very beginning. Now they saw the first fruit, not a victory, but a beginning. That day, Cedar Hollow didn't shake because of an act of violence. It shook because a truth was finally spoken, a small, trembling, courageous truth that rattled the foundation of an entire corrupt system. And its collapse didn't come from an earthquake. It came from the voice of a father, a child, and the truth. And from that day forward, no one would stand alone again. The first rays of morning sunlight gently streamed through the classroom window, casting a warm golden glow on the faded wooden desks and chairs. Outside, the tree in the schoolyard shed its leaves one by one, spinning softly in the early breeze like pieces of a quiet memory. The chirping of sparrows echoed from high branches, blending with the sound of the bell signaling the start of first period, bringing with it a peace that had been absent for weeks. No one at Clearbrook Elementary School could quite remember the last time a morning had felt normal. What once seemed mundane and easy to overlook had now become the most longed-for experience after all the chaos. The silence of the hallways, the soft rustling of pages in class, the gentle tone of a teacher's voice instead of harsh commands. It all marked a new beginning, as if a thick layer of dust had been wiped clean from a shared memory. Lily Walker sat at the third desk by the window. On her desk was a box of crayons worn down at the tips and a blank sheet of paper. She was drawing intently, head tilted, her black hair tied neatly with a pale pearl-colored ribbon. On the paper, a picture was slowly taking shape. A small house beneath a blue sky, with two figures standing hand in hand. One was a little girl. The other was Ethan. Below the drawing, in slightly wobbly handwriting, she wrote, "Me and Dad, in the light." No one told Lily what to draw. No one mentioned the past, but when her drawing was pinned to the corner of the classroom wall, it left several adults silently staring at it for a long time. Weeks had passed since Ethan Walker shook the entire system. Principal Glenn Foster, Miss Catherine Doyle had been suspended immediately, and within days, recordings, witness accounts from other children, and even long-forgotten anonymous letters came to light. The court launched an urgent investigation. Foster was removed from his position, and Doyle was arrested. Public response was fierce, but no longer driven by blind outrage. Instead, it became a wave demanding transparency, clarity, and most of all, true protection for the children. A special assembly was held that Friday, not to praise individuals, but to officially launch the School Child Protection Oversight Committee, a group of parents, psychologists, and teachers led by Rachel Jennings. She was once a single mother overlooked in countless PTA meetings. Now, she was the first to read the committee's pledge. "We do not promise to change the world, but we will never let a child face it alone." Noah Whitman, the journalist who had closely followed the case, was invited to speak about journalistic ethics and the importance of truth. As he stood on the small stage in the school courtyard, the breeze played with the colorful flags behind him. Many students looked up, eyes filled with curiosity and admiration, and in the eyes of the teachers that day, something had changed. No more hesitation, no more glances over their shoulders when a child spoke, only a willingness to listen, as if they too had been freed from something long weighing on them. Lily was invited on stage to receive a new set of crayons donated by a support organization. She didn't say a word as she walked up, just bowed politely, accepted the gift, and returned to her seat. But as she passed the new vice principal's desk, she paused, looked up, and quietly asked, "Miss, can I hang my drawing in the corner of the class? I want everyone to see the light." The silver-hilled vice principal smiled and nodded. And that was all it took. Like a ripple, students from other classes began putting up drawings, writing poems, and leaving small messages about their feelings. The old corner at the end of the hallway became the listening corner, where paper no longer meant tests, but hearts being heard. That afternoon, Ethan picked Lily up as usual. She ran to him, backpack swinging, holding a box of drawings in her arms. On the ride home, she kept gazing up at the sky as if searching for something in the fading light. "If I don't want to go to school tomorrow, would you be sad?" Lily asked without looking up, her voice as soft as the wind. Ethan paused. He knelt down to her level, eyes filled with emotion he couldn't name. "I won't be sad. If you're not ready, I'll be here." The two of them walked hand in hand along the sunlit brick path. On the second-floor balcony, an older teacher leaned against the railing, watching. He was once the man who hadn't spoken up when he heard the quiet sobbing from Catherine Doyle's office. He used to think silence was the safest choice, but today he had signed on as an honorary member of the Oversight Committee. He exhaled, then smiled. Not everyone gets a second chance, but he had taken his. Inside Ethan's home, Lily's drawing was framed in wood and hung above the dining table. The house wasn't big or fancy, but the lights were on every night and laughter echoed during simple family meals. Ethan still fell silent at times, still stared out the window as if listening for something. But it wasn't fear anymore, it was peace. A home, after all, doesn't begin with walls and a roof, but with someone who listens when a child hasn't yet found the words. Perhaps what touches us most in this story isn't just the journey of a father, but the way light can find its way into the darkest corners if even one person dares to speak up, to move toward the truth. Ethan wasn't a hero. He was just an ordinary father. He had once retreated, once stayed silent, but when his daughter needed him most, he chose to rise. And from that moment on, justice began to move. The wicked found no more places to hide. Those who had been complicit, who turned a blind eye, were finally held accountable. Meanwhile, the brave, no matter how small, were rewarded with peace, with a true home where a child's voice is heard with the heart. Dear friend, have you ever witnessed something wrong but hesitated to speak up? Have you ever wondered, if I stay silent, who will speak up instead? And if you are a mother, a sister, or someone who has ever truly listened to the little things a child says, do you realize you might be the candle that lights up homes still trapped in shadows? Please share with me how you felt after watching this story. What moment moved you the most? And if given the chance, what would you do differently? I would truly love to hear your story, your quiet acts of courage, your unseen efforts to do what is right. How are you doing these days? Have you been sleeping well? Please tell me, because you deserve to be cared for.